Okay, let's start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone who joined from different parts of the world. And welcome to today's webinar, From Bench to Bedside Together, Patient-Driven Innovation in Infectious Disease Clinical Trials. My name is Carl Aryan, and I will be your moderator today. Also, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. On behalf of the Infectious Disease Alliance and Spirity, as the organizers of this webinar, I want to thank you for joining us for this important discussion. We are delighted to have a diverse audience of global health leaders, policymakers, researchers, innovators, and patient advocates from across the world. Together, we are here to spotlight a call to action, one that puts patients at the very center of infectious disease research and clinical trials. We know the power of collaboration. Evidence shows that patient engagement makes trials faster, fairer, and more effective. That is why the Infectious Disease Alliance is calling on governments, funders, researchers, innovators, and civil society to act now. With that in mind, let us begin today's discussion. We are privileged to be joined by the distinguished speakers who will share their perspectives and experience. We will start with the opening remarks by the IDA's Executive Director, Rodrigo Scottini, and then we have opening remark by Michelle Silva, CEO and co-founder of Spirity. And then we will move to our keynote speech by Dr. Michelle Warren and Sina Kumar. And then we have our panel discussion and interactive Q&A session, and with the following with closing remarks. Yes, so each speaker will deliver opening remarks of about 15 minutes, after which we'll move into a moderated panel discussion and interactive Q&A session, as I've mentioned. And to start us off, I'm pleased to welcome Rodrigo Scottini, the Executive Director of IDA. He will bring the opening remarks and also briefly introduce the Infectious Disease Alliance with some slides. Now, over to you, Rodrigo.
Thanks, Carl. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. On behalf of the Infectious Disease Alliance, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all for today's webinar, From Bench to Bedside Together, Patient-Driven Innovation in Infectious Disease Clinical Trials. So we are honored to have you with us today. We meet at a pivotal moment in global health. Infectious diseases, whether antimicrobial resistance, tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS, malaria, or new pandemic threats, they continue to change health systems worldwide. And while science has advanced remarkably, clinical trials, the very backbone of medical progress, cannot succeed without something just as vital: trust, ethics, and meaningful patient engagement. Patients and communities are no longer passive participants. They are co-creators of research. Their voices shape how clinical trials are designed, how trust is built, and how outcomes can be more equitable. Yet, today we face urgent challenges. Funding for infectious disease research remains far too low, with less than 5% of global R&D devoted to neglected diseases, despite low and middle-income countries carrying more than 70% of the burden. At the same time, shrinking civic space and cuts in international health funding are silencing patient advocacy groups, the very organizations that ensure accountability, recruitment, and ethical oversight. And while digital innovation offers tremendous opportunity, the digital divide risks leaving many communities behind. If we do not act now, clinical trials will struggle with recruitment and trust. Marginalized communities will continue to be excluded from the benefits of research, and ultimately, global health security itself will weaken. But the good news is, we know patient engagement works. studies show that trials with active patient participation recruit up to 25 to 30% faster, and adherence improves significantly. Patient-driven innovation is not optional, it is essential. That's why the Infectious Disease Alliance is issuing a call to action. We are urging governments, funders, researchers, innovators, and civil society to stand with patients, to safeguard civic space and funding for patient voices, to embed patient engagement into design and oversight, to invest in ethical, inclusive practices and digital tools that leaves no one behind, and to work together across sectors to ensure that every trial is fair, transparent, and truly global. The message today is clear. The future of clinical research must be collaborative, inclusive, and rights-based. Every delay in strengthening patient-driven trials jeopardizes lives and trust. So let's move forward together from bench to bedside, with patients at the center of innovation. Change starts with action, and today that action begins with us. Thank you. And with that, let's begin our discussions. I think before I'll continue with a couple of slides. So the first one is explaining what IDA is. So we are the voice of civil society on infectious diseases, kind of like working on public health advocacy for infectious diseases. Next slide, please. Our vision is to reduce the burden of infectious diseases and improve access to health care. And our mission is to unite civil society organizations globally, having this One Health perspective. So what we do, so we advocate for impactful policies and sustainable finance, uniting civil society voices, promoting healthcare system strengthening, fostering cross-sector collaboration, and promoting equity, amplify the voices of underserved communities. Next one. So our curious change is, right now we're in step 4. So setting up the priority. So definitely clinical trials is an area that our patient community is extremely interested in. Then generating evidence for that. So what are actually the changes that are needed? We have met with our partners to discuss that. We have built some partnerships. We're further building that. We are organizing these events to advocate for change and disseminating evidence. Then we move into action, so policy collaboration. We have a project that will come out later this year or at the beginning of next year, the voices of patient communities, that we'll be able to hear a little bit more later, and further implementation of those. Next one. Yeah, so IDA is a member-based organization, so civil society, as many of you today are the base of our work. So feel free to go to our website. If you haven't joined the IDA yet, feel free to do so. Next slide, please. Yeah, this organigram. You can also see on the website. Next slide. So our committees, you can see which areas we work on. You have research and clinical trials. That's committee number 8. You can also see the other areas we focus on. Next slide, please.
This was your last slide.
Yeah, that was my last one. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you, Rodrigo, for opening today's conversation. Now let's hear from Michel Silva, CEO and co-founder of Asperity. He has a PhD in bioengineering, and based on his experience by working with various stakeholders in the health system, Michel's co-authored a book on patient engagement for the life science industry. Over to you, Michel.
Thank you, Carl and Rodrigo. So very happy to be here. So thanks for the invitation and also for organizing this webinar together. And I would like to maybe come back, maybe just a few words of introduction indeed. Clinical trials is something that is one of the main pillars in the activities that we do at Asperity. So Asperity is a Brussels-based company, and what we actually do is we develop solutions to empower patients, high level. But concretely, what does this mean? We want to really make sure we can give this spark of hope to patients. And so that's why the name Asperity, Esperanza, because often when you are looking to unmet needs of patients or even emotions or perspective in the patient journey, at the end, what really brings you forward is this spark of hope that you will be better, the spark of hope that you will find medication that will change your life, that will cure you, And this is exactly what we would like to facilitate. And we're speaking about clinical trials, patient engagement. We all know that, okay, what are drivers of patients wanting to participate in clinical trials? As we know that often the physicians play a very important role to activate patients, to mention trials to patients that, okay, this is a trial that might be of interest to you. Would you be interested to know more? If yes, the informed consent or the screening process starts, you go to informed consent process. So there's a whole process, and often it's very physician, and it should be also physician-led. But still, at the same time, we see that there's a lot of activity going on the patient side. Patients are curious. Patient organizations are curious as well. And there's more and more a need to also allow access to clinical trial information to patients, and also use the patient insights, as Rodrigo mentioned, to optimize trial design. So when you talk about clinical trial patient engagement, I think we can look to it in different dimensions. One aspect is the research dimension, where before a trial actually starts, you really engage with the patient population, you listen to the needs. There's a completely different way of assessing burden of trials in a rural area versus a urban area, for example. In different world, there's cultural differences that might play a role. And how do patients see certain interventions, for example? And also, how do you perceive certain questions when you report patient-reported outcomes and symptoms? So all of this information can be also driven by patient insights to really optimize the way you design your trials and how you recruit patients. And then, of course, there's the actual trial recruitment phase, where the trial has to be aware among physicians, among patients. And then, of course, there's a phase of trial retention, where you would like to make sure that people keep on going and do not drop out of the trial, because this will, at the end, mean less data points. This will increase potential access of novel medication to the market. So it's very important as ecosystem, as stakeholders, to work on all of these domains. And that's why we're very happy actually to work also with the IDA in this space, where the first step is to see how can we also bring trials closer to patients and patient advocacy groups, and also physician organizations, by activating a search engine. So we actually work together with IDA to embed on the portal. So when you go to digital resources, so you can go to clinical trial portal. We actually embedded a search engine where you can search on particular disease areas, where you will also be able to find a bit more information about what trials are, what is the difference between a phase 1 and phase 2, etc. So the idea is to give information about clinical trials if you're not familiar with it, but then, of course, to make you search as well, because at the end, the proof is in the pudding. Sometimes they say that activation, being active, is what we want when you're talking about empowerment. So this we do by actually offering the search engine, where you can actually start browsing through your own, based on keywords through trials, and also see who the contact persons are, so you can actually reach out to them. So on the next slide, you can see just an overview of some generic articles about contents of what clinical trials are, the differences between the phases, questions to ask as well. So often we get so many questions saying, okay, I would like to address the trial to my physician, but how do I start? What questions should I ask? So the idea is that we can actually motivate and inspire people to just ask one different question in consultation, and this might trigger a full flow and even change even patient outcomes at the end. So when you go to the next slide, you will see actually the basic. So we've simplified it a lot, how the search engine looks like. So you can type in autocomplete disease, keywords as well. Think about a mutation, a biomarker, your country. So in this case, we gave an example of tuberculosis, South Africa. You go to the next phase, and then you can actually, on the next slide, see the overview of all the trials. So the idea is that you actually browse through, and that you can refine based on keyword refinements, based on maybe phases, if you're interested in phases. We even also on the left bottom have an option that you can leave your email address, so you will get notified proactively when new trials become available in the disease area of your interest. And when you see a trial you would like to have more, and this is you can find, for example, the description of the trial, the title. So you can go to the next slide, Carl. So here you can actually go over the information, and you will be able to print this information, bring this to your physician, because the call to action is, of course, always discuss this information with your physician. Sometimes physicians will be aware about the trial, sometimes they will not be aware. And by actually facilitating this and sharing this information with them, you can also see if you're actually eligible. So the inclusion-exclusion criteria you can also find together with the contact details, as example on the next slide for this trial. This is a trial in South Africa. You will see who to contact in this case if you have an interest or have questions about the trial. So this is actually a first path in the journey. Yeah? So what is this journey is to really see how can we increase access to physicians, to patient organizations, advocacy groups. And that's why we have now also prepared actually a dashboard that will be made available to stakeholders at the end of. You can also see the molecules that are, for example, in HIV, tuberculosis, that are coming, which molecules on a phase 1, a phase 2, a phase 3, what institutes are actively involved in these trials, who are the sponsors behind this. So by having a better view on the insights of what innovation is coming in your disease area, you as an advocacy group, you can anticipate, you can prepare, especially when you look into reimbursement procedures, health technology assessment, more and more the voice of the patient will be heard. So it's really important to understand when you do a horizon scanning, when you could provide input as a patient advocacy group and HTA process to really understand better the context of new medications compared to what is there on the market already. So to facilitate this, we actually built, based on all the data we have in the portal, views that we can make available to both HCPs, patient advocacy groups, and sponsors as well. So very happy that today this webinar is live, and that we have distinguished speakers as well, as Carl mentioned. So thank you, Carl, and over to you.
Thank you, Michel, for introducing the clinical trial platform, which we launched on the IDA website in collaboration with your organization. We are also excited to announce the launch of another digital resource that you can find on the IDA's website, the Global Infectious Disease Repository. This library is a dedicated platform to host, organize, and share key scientific outputs and our resources. This repository is designed to make infectious disease research, policy documents, and materials more accessible to partners, researchers, patients, and advocates. So these new sections on our website will be part of a bigger platform, as Rodrigo and Michel mentioned, Voices of Communities for Equity, or VOCE. The aim of this platform is to connect patients, healthcare professionals, caregivers, and civil society organizations, and create a neutral, community-centered platform that empowers underrepresented populations to influence global health decisions. So if your organization is interested in co-developing this platform, please write an email to us after this webinar. Now I would like to introduce the first keynote speaker, Dr. Michel Warren, the Executive Director at AVAC. He's leading global HIV prevention and research advocacy. Under his leadership, AVAC expanded from HIV vaccine work to broader biomedical prevention and access. Now I give the word to Michel.
Great, Carl. Thank you so very much. And I was just going to say, you're going to do my slides, which is great. So thank you. And I want to thank you and Rodrigo and Asperity as well and my fellow Mitchell. I'm rarely on a phone call with another Mitchell, so this is a very auspicious day. But thank you for inviting AVAC to participate in this conversation. And it really is coming at such a critical moment. And I'm going to take you through a bit of the history of how AVAC and partners got to the good participatory practice guidelines in HIV research. And although our work at AVAC and with our partners is primarily in HIV, I think the larger issues of engagement in global health research is quite clear, and hopefully I'll make that quite clear of why this is not about any one disease or pathogen, but rather it is about a research enterprise, and it is about engaging communities in all of their diversities, and that is more important now than ever. As it happens, I'm in Washington, D.C. today for meetings, and that has both that's both good and bad. It's a beautiful day, that's good, but life in Washington and life in this country really put a huge cloud over the global health enterprise and the research enterprise, and we can't ignore that. So anyway, let me jump ahead. If you go to the next slide, I'll do a quick introduction about AVAC, some of the context history, and then talk a bit about good participatory practice guidelines and how they might be a useful tool as they are expanded into other disease areas. A quick slide, if you go next, to about AVAC. This is our 30th year as an organization. AVAC began in the 90s as the AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition, and we still do a lot of work related to HIV vaccine research and development. As I think you all know on the line, we still are a long way from an HIV vaccine, but we have, as AVAC, expanded because the field has evolved so much over those 30 years. This is a quick snapshot of our current approach, which is really a vision to imagine a world without AIDS and with global health equity. And I'm so glad Rodrigo and Mitchell both described this issue of equity being core. It's in this city of Washington, D.C. right now, equity for some politicians is a dirty word, but we want to embrace that word proudly and loudly. It's all about equity. Our work is to accelerate the development and eventual access to HIV prevention options, but as part of a comprehensive integrated pathway to global health equity. And a lot of our work is around translating very complex science and advocating for the right policies and programs and research agendas and catalyzing stakeholders to make those things come true. And this issue of translation particularly, it's really where a lot of this begins in terms of research translation, and I'll describe that in just a minute. But first, if you go to the next slide, it's impossible not to flag the current moment we're in, that research is under assault. It's certainly coming from my country, and I apologize on behalf of those of us in the United States who find the current environment appalling, but it has implications everywhere. You can see, of course, the pause on foreign assistance and the dismantling of USAID, but the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, has been the largest funder of biomedical research across all disease areas. And colleagues of ours at Impact Global Health document this every year, whether HIV or TB or emerging pathogens, diarrheal disease, contraception, you name it, about 70 to 80% of that funding comes from the NIH. So although we definitely can look and want to see other funders step up to fill these spaces and these gaps, these are gaps that are too huge to fill. So as we say, when America sneezes, the world catches pneumonia, and very sadly, America is catching something much more serious, or the world is catching something much more serious than pneumonia right now. But what we're seeing is an assault on global research, an assault on research with special populations, as they are often called, or vulnerable populations, changes in the scientific review process, major changes in staffing to support science, changing the funding mechanism for U.S. academic institutions. And then two very specific things. Clearly, this assault on vaccines. The NIH has cut two of the leading mechanisms to generate new concepts in HIV vaccine development, and just a couple of weeks ago, defunded mRNA vaccine development. And I won't get into all the details, but this is the context in which all of this conversation happens. But I want to take a step back, if you go to the next slide, of where our work in good participatory practice started. Imagine a world sitting here in 2025 in HIV that doesn't talk about PrEP. And I think many of you, even if you don't work in HIV, have probably heard there is a new long-acting injectable form of PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, that's called lenacapavir, that is just beginning to be rolled out. We talk about PrEP now as a cornerstone of the HIV response, but just 21 years ago, these are pictures from the AIDS conference in Bangkok, Thailand in 2004, when PrEP was a code word for unethical research. Research trials were being shut down, often because researchers didn't fully understand and appreciate community perspectives, And at the same time, communities that were engaged in that research didn't fully understand the research enterprise, the research protocols, the way in which those trials were designed. It was a classic example of people talking across each other, and it was chaos and controversy. The good news, two pieces of good news. One, PrEP did not die in 2004. Trials were redesigned with community engagement and participation at its core to really reimagine how research could happen. And we have now PrEP as a cornerstone of the AIDS response, as I said. And the second, I think, positive outcome was the development of the Good Participatory Practice Guidelines. If you go to the next slide, we began working with research partners, and AVAC is a relatively small civil society advocacy organization, but we began working with research partners because we recognized this was not just about the PrEP trials. This was about how research happens in resource-limited settings and with marginalized populations. And working together first with UNAIDS in 2007, launching the first edition of the Good Participatory Practice Guidelines, and then later in 2011, this updated version. If you go to the next slide, the guidelines are developed in three sections. The first is the importance of good participatory practice. The second, the guiding principles behind it. And the third, really the schematic of how to apply these throughout the life cycle of research. What's really important when we develop these, and it won't surprise those of you who work in clinical research, I think any of us who work in this space know that good clinical practice guides clinical trial conduct, good laboratory practice dictates how laboratories are managed and run, and good manufacturing practice, of course, relates to how products are made. We really wanted to create something similar with participatory practices, something that was measurable and monitorable, just like GCP, GLP, GMP, and that's why we focused on this idea of GPP. It really begins with what is, in the next slide, what for me is the single slide that people should remember. It's one of my favorite slides of the last 2.5 decades of working in this space, and that is putting trial participation and trial participants at the center. And what you see are these different layers of stakeholders. And what became very clear is that in those early PrEP trials with those controversies, advocates from outside of the local community were making claims about what was ethical and not ethical. So you can't ignore that global stakeholders have a role to play in how a trial is designed and conducted. But this schematic, and I'll come back to this in a minute with a way to recognize it in practice, really looks at how every one of these layers of this, what we think of as a fried egg, every one of those layers has a role to play. And the work of good participatory practice is how to make sure that all stakeholder perspectives are heard and understood and appreciated in the process. I will say that GPP does not prevent controversy. It doesn't prevent disagreements. We hope that it enables a way to navigate through controversies and disagreements. So it doesn't pretend to fix everything. It hopes to provide a process by which to navigate through. If you go to the next slide, then these 6 guiding principles won't surprise anybody because they're not just about GPP. This should be the guiding principles of all of our collective work to advance global health and equity, but they really are at the heart of the research enterprise. And very importantly, undergirding all of this is this idea of research literacy, both the community literacy about research, but the researcher literacy about communities, and really making sure that is shared across all stakeholders. If you go to the next slide, as I said, the third and largest section of GPP relates to these areas, these topic areas that relate to the entire research enterprise, because very often community engagement is boiled down to recruitment of trial participants or retaining them in clinical trials. But what GPP really does is outlines that engagement has to be something that happens throughout the process, when formative research activities are happening, even before you have a research protocol, when you're developing stakeholder engagement mechanisms. It's not good enough for a researcher to say, well, we decided to have a community advisory board and this is what it looks like. This should be co-created throughout the entire process. And each of these topic areas in this section is then in the guidelines developed in terms of what is core business, what has to be done, and then what are special considerations. Everything from formative research all the way through to closing out a trial and disseminating research. It happens throughout that process. And there's a whole section 2 of GPP that talks about how to maintain trust and engagement with communities throughout the process, even between trials. If you go to the next slide, then I think one of the most important concepts to remember is it's a process. This is never about a single trial. It's never about oral PrEP or an HIV vaccine or a TB drug or a new diagnostic. This is about how communities and various stakeholders engage in a larger enterprise. And if we think of it in that way, I think we might do better together in terms of building long-term durable relationships. So you can see this is about how trials get planned, how they get implemented, and then how post-trial activities happen. Very often we think about engagement from bench to bedside, about taking a product from the bench to the bedside. What GPP and what we at AVAC try to think about in advocacy is how do we create the bench to bedside across the entire ecosystem, not just about one product. If you go to the next slide, I do want to say what GPP is not, because very often community engagement can be simplified to be about recruitment, or about having a community advisory board, or about having participants in trial sites having those good interactions. But what we say about GPP is it's not any one of these things. It's an element of all of these things. It's most of all not a nice to have. It is core to research. And I think very often when we look, even pre-January 20th, when research budgets were not being cut as they were, but even when they were being reduced, the very first thing to be cut is community engagement. We see that everywhere. It's perceived to be something, oh, we'll talk about it, it's nice to have, but the minute there's pressure on the system, it's the first thing to go. And so we have to really, as a community, and I'm so glad that IDA and Asperity brought us together today, we have to make sure that in the midst of the current crisis that's not going to disappear anytime soon, that it's going to be too easy to say, well, we can't afford community engagement. If anything, we need to double down on community engagement even more so now than ever. A couple of quick milestones on the next, and again, GPP grew out of these controversies in 2005, and this next slide shows you a bit of a timeline of what's happened, and I won't go through all the details. We're really proud to see a concept in 2005 emerging through any number of processes over the last now 20 years to culminate in a deep and durable literature, both of other adaptations of GPP in other areas, and I'll show you a slide in a minute that looks at some of those. It's now in the literature, so we know that as advocates we can make demands, but it's when things are in peer review and when they're understood and assessed by the research community that they matter. And so you'll see a number of important publications here. But if you go to the next slide, I'll go back to our favorite fried egg to show you where in different places, and I guess part of my slide didn't come through, but you can see each of these blue boxes kind of overlays. The one on the bottom left looks at what happens at the community level, and we have some great examples of some trial-specific engagement at the community level. But if you look at the top right, there's some national activities that happen within Thailand, the development of national cabs to really drive research across a range of therapeutic areas. In South Africa, a national cab forum. Uganda, the introduction and incorporation of GPP in their overall ethics guidance. So you can see how this emerges at different levels in different ways. And then finally, globally, and I'm delighted that my great friend and colleague, Stacey Hanna, is on, who's going to join the panel, who leads our research engagement activities, to give you a sense of what happens also at the global level. And there are a number of great examples that, again, I know she'll get into in the conversation. If you go to the next slide, again, just a couple of examples, and a lot of these are listed at the end of this presentation, which are hyperlinked. People are welcome to look. I will just draw people's attention to a journal supplement from the Journal of the International AIDS Society there at the bottom left that is a collection of articles all about the science, theory, and practice of engaged research, looking at GPP and beyond from just a couple of years ago. So there's now a rich literature about how GPPs really influenced the research enterprise. As I said, if you go to the next slide, AVAC is primarily focused in HIV, although we work in reproductive health and TB and emerging pathogens. We're very proud of partnerships with others, and you can see in the 20 years of HIV and GPP, the development and adaptation of GPP for TB drug development. Then you see in 2016, the development of GPP for emerging pathogens. 2017, the development around TB vaccine research and development. And then in 2021, an urgent piece of work we did looking at how to apply GPP in urgency to the time of COVID vaccine and therapeutic research. And so those documents all exist online, and I think really show you, and again, maybe something to talk about as a collective, this is about infectious disease research writ large. It's not just about one area. If you go to the next slide, and I won't dwell on this, I think Stacy's going to address some of these recent successes to show you how this engagement happens across whole programs, not just about any one product. And a couple of just final slides, just showing some resources available to the global community. The next one, there are a number of online training courses that are available, from GPP broadly to strengthening engagement through ethics review. And there's a relatively newer training material related to GPP and implementation science. Obviously a very important area as we move new HIV PrEP, new TB drugs, hopefully eventually a new TB vaccine into implementation science. And GPP isn't just about those phase 1, 2, and 3, but it's about preclinical and early clinical development, and it should be about implementation science and taking product scale. And these tools help you there. All of this, if you go to the next slide, if you want to look, all of this is incorporated in the GPP body of evidence. The hyperlink is at the bottom that looks at all of these tools across the whole ecosystem, and categorizes them as case studies, as guidelines, as training tools, and other materials, all of which are available online and open access. Finally, just there are more hyperlinks in this next slide. And then I'm going to conclude with just one final slide, if I may, and that is to draw attention to an effort that we at AVAC and a number of people around the world are engaged with. On September 16th and 17th, we are hosting a 24-hour online marathon. It's going to be live streamed. You can go to saveaidsresearch.org. And this is an attempt to really create a global understanding that research matters. This is about AIDS research, but you could fill in the blank. We need to save and maintain global health and infectious disease research for the world. And this research marathon is really hopefully going to show the world that research matters. And we hope that all of you will engage in it. Again, thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to turn this back to you, Carl, and move us forward.
Thank you, Mitchell, for that valuable and insightful contribution. Now let's hear from the second keynote speaker, Lesina Kumar, CEO of the Global Coalition of TB Advocates. Lesina is a public health leader with expertise in advocacy and community engagement across India, Sudan, and Southeast Asia. Her leadership has led to community indicators in TB reports and global policy changes, marking her impact on the health and equity worldwide. Now over to you, Lesina.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for introducing me, and also for inviting me to this very important discussions. The topic is very, very interesting, but also especially what I was asked to speak on. How people change the course of clinical trials has been something that has been very close to my heart over the 30-year journey of my public health work. Efforts have been to actually bring the people affected to the core, to the center of all our efforts. Next slide, please. So I'm the CEO of the Global Coalition of TB Advocates, which has been around for the past 12 years. And it's a coalition of people affected by TB, bringing their lived experiences to a global platform and bridging the gap between the civil society and all other stakeholders. We believe that we need to have our voices inform the policy decisions that are being made that affects individuals affected by TB. Next slide, please. So just to say that we started off with just a handful of us who believed that this was really needed in a very medicalized TB response. We needed to bring in the voices of the lived experience of people from across the globe. And today we have about 560 members across the globe. It's a very loose coalition. If you're affected by TB anywhere in the world, you are welcome to join, and we keep the group um, energized and communicate by sharing information about TB and advocacy. Next slide, please. So we have four main strategic objectives that we work on. One is issue-based advocacy, and we worked a lot on stigma. We worked a lot on making things like TB preventive treatment accessible for people. We worked on human rights and TB. So some of the major issues, and we try to advocate for them at different levels till it actually becomes a policy change. And we have seen successes in the past few years. Second objective is to build coalitions and have strategic communications. Third one is improving governance and accountability and representation. So as you saw, we have people, members from across the globe, because we really feel it's important to get perspectives from global, different regions and local to inform policy. And capacity building is an ongoing process of training individuals. We've developed a lot of tools which are there available on our website on different topics. And we also have online training platforms that we use quite regularly to train our members. And recently we've started a youth coalition, and we are quite involved in building their capacity as well. Next slide, please. So now, you know, when we talk about changing the course of clinical trials, it needs a real shift in our thinking. You know, meaningfully engaging people affected as valuable partners and empowering them, you know, very much like the previous speaker was also speaking, you know, to contribute as experts with the lived experience is very crucial at all stages of the research cycle. Uh, in TB, at least, it was so medicalized that people were missing from everything, including research. So I think one of the first shifts in our thinking has to be research with people, not on people. And this takes some time. At least what we've seen in the TB world is that, you know, people just are either trial participants or passive recipients of care, but not seen as valuable co-creators, valuable partners. And also, we need to shift to engaging with the communities meaningfully to be valuable partners, because it's a universal human right, isn't it? Because communities have to be more than just trial participants. And each, you know, we don't say patients in TB because that is very stigmatizing. And also, you are a patient as long as you're taking the treatment. So we refer to people with TB as people with TB, individuals with TB, or if you finished your treatment, then we say TB survivors. So lived experience really matters, because the best technology and innovation is of no use if there's nobody at the receiving end to actually take them, or there are barriers to accessing them. Reduces stigma. In TB, stigma is very, very high. In all our trainings across the globe, whether it was Latin America and the Caribbean, whether it was Africa, whether it was North Africa, whether it is Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific, or India, we heard from hundreds of TB survivors that they did not seek care because they felt stigmatized. So, you know, just stop and think for a minute. We spend all this resources, energy into developing a tool, whether it is a diagnostic tool or treatment regimen, that people are unable to access it because of stigma, then we've really lost even before we've started. So I think it's important to take the perspective, the input of people who are affected for us to move forward. And as I said, communities really need to be at the center of any disease response at all levels, whether it is local, national, regional, or global. And also strong collaboration. I've personally seen this being a member of the Global TB CAP for 10 years and right now being a member of the Community Advisory Group for Unite for TB. That strong collaboration between researchers, scientists, product developers, and communities is actually a win-win for everybody. And later on, I will show you why I'm saying this. And also engaging with the community is actually better for research because there's better recruitment, it's better for enrollment, it's better for retention because people have a stake in it. When we've engaged with the communities, there's an understanding of what the research is about, and there is a stake in it. So better understanding actually means better buy-in, not just by the individual, but with the larger community around that person that supports them. Next slide, please. Now, I want to bring two case studies before you, two of them that I've been really part of. And this is community advisory boards, CABs, or community advisory groups, the CAGs. Now, this is, sort of maybe perhaps how to do it. Because many times we see that nobody actually says no to engaging communities, but many times we don't know. So just to kind of break it down very simply, while emphasizing the fact that no research should actually be conducted without engaging with the communities, but also to give a few ideas of how we can do it so that it becomes a win-win for everyone. Now, community advisory groups or CAGs and CABs play a pivotal role in TB research and representing community interests, fostering trust. This is very important. Trust is extremely important. And when you feel valued, you are willing to trust people. And also a meaningful collaboration between researchers and those who are affected. There needs to be a connect. We need to be speaking the same language. And for a long time, we were speaking two different languages, and there was no understanding. And one was giving and one was receiving passively. And this really needs to change and will be very impactful in changing the research environments around us. The second high-level meeting on tuberculosis in 2023, really made a reference to community advisory boards and community advisory groups, and they were, really recommended as an effective model to be followed in terms of engaging the communities. Though in recent years, we are really seeing this change, this shift happen of meaningful collaboration with the civil society, whether it is on drug development, whether it is on policy change, and that has been really life-changing for the treatments, the diagnostics, for accessing care, and this needs to be strengthened and we need to collaborate to make this a reality for everybody and every research initiative that happens. But sadly, despite all these benefits and recognizing and knowing them, the practical implementation of this collaboration really remains inconsistent or challenging. And many times it also becomes just a tick in the box. And that needs to change from just doing it because it's expected, but actually to engage with the communities, the affected communities, because they're the best experts to inform, research, change course even midway if it is needed, and then take this forward. Next slide, please. So I talked about the Global TB CAB, the Global TB Community Advisory Board. It's a group of research literate community activists from the HIV and TB networks from around the world that works to ensure TB research is actually driven by the needs and priorities of communities affected by TB, and that the resulting innovations and interventions are accessible to everybody, that they're equitable. Everybody, everywhere receives them. And I had the privilege of being part of this for 10 years, right from the beginning, and have seen tremendous progress in how researchers, the scientific community, and the affected communities can work together. Next slide, please. So now coming to the community advisory group of Unite for TB. Um, Unite for TB is actually a consortium of developers, and the aim is to set a new standard for anti-TB regimen, to develop that, upgrading the current clinical trial methodology, and to ensure that it is more efficacious with new regimens that are being brought in. Now, there are 30 partners in this, and Unite for TB actually set up the community advisory group right at the beginning of this 7-year project. It wasn't an afterthought. So we came in, the community advisory group came in even while the work packages were being decided and coming together. So I think that's a very important thing, not to bring in the communities once everything is cooked, but actually to have them develop the recipe as well. Now, community advisory group of U for TB, the objective is to, very simple, it's to provide community perspectives and suggestions during all aspects of the project's journey, for all activities that include communities, TB survivors, based on the lived experience. So this is what we work on. And so far, we are somewhat midway into this 7-year project, and we see that this is already changing the thinking of so many of us, and we are actually able to do things that are more acceptable, more sensitive to the needs of the people on the ground. So some of the activities that we engage in is we meet with the trial team leads on a regular basis, and the consortium members, to understand where the different trials are, at what stage. And we also discuss and review the inclusion and the exclusion criteria, and we question, why is this group excluded? Why isn't this group included? So there is space to do that, to understand. And we also discuss the latest guidance documents, and we bring that to the researchers, to the trial team leads, and have a discussion, and then take action in terms of, putting out our thoughts, to perhaps, look at the guidance documents and see if we can change what we have planned. And then we also review and provide regular feedback to exhaustive protocols. This is not an easy job, but we still do that because it's important. And one of the things that I constantly do is reviewing participant information material. And I feel like this is a very big area that we all tend to make mistakes. We're all communities at different levels. Culture plays an extremely important role in our life, in the way we look at different aspects of our life. And what works in, say, Europe may not work in India. What works in Indonesia may not work in Africa. So I think to recognize that you cannot have one size fits all. So we try and work with the trial teams, the local trial teams as well, to see can we make the participant information material, to resonate better with the local communities. And we suggest changes. Many times the changes are taken, but sometimes it's not possible. So we live with it and we say, okay, let's make sure that you explain to the trial participants, the local communities, the constraints within that, and what is actually being proposed. And every annual general body meeting, we bring our work and present it to the community, to the consortium, and it's usually received quite well, and we are happy to see the changes as well. Next slide, please. So, community advisory group in Unite for TB, I really feel is a win-win for all, and it has benefits both for the communities and for the project. So, some of the benefits for the communities are that there's a better understanding for the community of what the project is all about, what the trials are all about. So, when you understand better, you are in a better position to be part of it. Then appropriate language gets used, because sometimes, it's because the pharma, the industry professionals, the scientists may not really understand the ground realities. So this helps them to change the language that they use, which means there is also less stigma and more of an equal relationship. And then culturally appropriate communication. Um, then the medication regimens are aligned with the participant priorities, improving access and adherence. So this is a big benefit. Better understanding of all project outcomes, and also when they know that there is suggestions for inclusion and exclusion criteria, it's actually a benefit for the community. And then benefit for the project. Now, early input from the community advisory group actually encourages the project to consider people's perspectives, and keep that at the heart of everything we do. Just to say that TB for decades has been extremely medicalized. It's not looked at any of the people's, perspectives. So the solutions were very medical, but they were not working because TB, tuberculosis, is not just a medical problem. So we were finding medical solutions for a problem that is more than just medical. So it just kind of brings everything together. Then for the project, bringing community advisory group has meant that, some aspects that have not been considered, are thought of or considered. In several of our meetings, we hear the researchers and scientists say, oh, we never thought of that. So I think it's a real benefit of bringing these two together. And then appropriate communication with participants and community means that the researchers also get a better, acceptance, whether it is at the project level or at the local level. And it continues to ensure that there are those linkages between communities, scientists, industries. So that's basically what I wanted to say in this. Next slide is just to say thank you. And there are some, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, and you find some of our social media things if you want to, if you're interested. So thank you very much. And sorry, I had to rush through this.
Yes. Thank you, Beresina, for the engaging presentation. Now we'll move into a moderated panel discussion. In addition to our previous speakers, we have two panelists in this discussion whom I would like to introduce before moving forward with the panel. So today we have Dr. Anna Paholczyk. a senior lecturer in medical ethics from the St. George School of Health and Medical Sciences, University of London. Her research explores ethics and new technologies with interest in moral philosophy, medical and research ethics, brain stimulation, gene editing, cerebral organoids, and artificial intelligence. Furthermore, our next panelist is Stacy Hanna, the Director of Research Engagement at AVAC. Stacy is a global public health professional with over 20 years of experience in clinical research in the developing world, including advocacy through local, national, and international stakeholder outreach, technical support provision for the conduct of HIV prevention and tuberculosis treatment clinical trials. Now I'd like to move on to the first topic, humanizing the trial experience, building trust, ethics, and equity. Just a quick note that each speaker has 2 minutes to discuss each question, and I would like to pose the first question to Blessina. So from your perspective, what does trust look like in clinical trials, and how can researchers better foster it?
I think I've talked a little bit in my presentation as well about trust. I think you tend to trust when you feel valued. And I think in research as well, if we really remember that we are doing research with people and not on people, they're not just subjects or participants, but actually co-creators of something that is beneficial. That definitely builds trust, number one. Number two is the way we communicate. And this isn't just for trials, or it's just human behavior, isn't it? Communication really helps to build that trust. So if the scientific community is talking in a language that communities don't understand, and I remember Michelle as well referred to this, it draws us further and further from each other. You're talking two different languages. So if you communicate in a language that both understand, because ultimately we want the same goal. And if that is established, that we all want the same thing, the communities, the scientists, the researchers, we all want the best for the person who's affected. I think that showing in action that a person is valued, you show that through your communication, you make the environment enabling for that person to come and give input and take the responses seriously. I think these are the four things that I would say that build trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Blessina. And in continuation of this topic, the next question is for Anna. How can we balance the need for rigorous informed consent with the reality of vulnerable or underserved population in low and medium income countries? Over to you, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. The importance of informed consent is, I think, widely recognized, but how exactly we do informed consent can really make a big difference. And gaining informed consent with particularly vulnerable populations or in vulnerable contexts may present unique challenges for researchers. An example of that might be just unfamiliarity with the idea of research, which may present as special challenge. Another challenge may be the difference, understanding the difference between participation in a research project, for example, or in comparison to an aid or a development project. And so in those contexts, securing the trust of leaders and the community, I think, is a prerequisite for continuing research. But in some communities, the concept of individual consent could be negatively influenced by the authority of local community leaders. So striking that balance between appropriate protection for individuals while maintaining long-term trust with communities, I think is important. And some individuals may have particular contextual issues that would present challenges in an ability to fully or independently understand the intention or the methodology of the project, despite potentially being directly impacted by it. And so the particular issues that may present challenges may include language, health, culture, educational factors, economic factors, and all of those may influence the comprehensibility of traditional informed consent procedures and make them more difficult. And so I think those particular challenges highlight the fact that we have to be sensitive to the context, but at the same time be mindful of not excluding certain groups or participants because those challenges may may make conduct of an informed consent process perhaps a little bit more laborious. And I think those challenges can provide the motivation to develop new methods and additional processes of obtaining consent. So that may mean development of appropriate digital resources, development community links that would enhance that consent process. So examples of currently used methods would be attempts to counteract low literacy with methods such as verbal consent, fingerprinting, and structuring the consent process so that participants feel comfortable in asking questions. One of probably my favorite solution that is also evidence-based is actually incorporating community representatives, so not researchers and not professionals, that would serve as advocates for patients and also be a go-to person that may overcome some barriers that hesitancy may be in asking questions in some context, and is evidence-based as well to in terms of being able to improve comfort that participants have in asking questions. And so I do think that what is needed is an approach that will not only overcome those previously identified challenges, but also provide the context and the culturally appropriate methods of seeking informed consent, and then feeding in the feedback gate from local communities and participants themselves about how those processes went. And so designing a consent process, including various aids that is responsive to patient community needs. So for example, digital resources, but also incorporating feedback as a learning, as kind of a learning tool, I think can help to balance and perhaps use the resources that one has most effectively.
Yes, thank you, Anna, for insightful answer. Now, Stacy, what are some practical steps you've seen that make communities feel like partners rather than simply supporters or bystanders to a trial?
Sure, thank you, and hello everyone. This has been really a great conversation, and I think I'll just start by saying thank you to IDA and Asperity for convening this discussion. You know, and as I think as you introduced me, I'm a colleague of Mitchell's, and as he kind of very comprehensively described, at AVAC we've been sort of chipping away at community engagement and GPP for almost 20 years now, and I think oftentimes it can feel like we're sort of fighting this fight on our own, and it really is challenging. It's exciting work, it's important work, but it's really challenging work on so many levels. And so I think being able to kind of come together with some new faces and share lessons is always really nice. I will try to be brief. I know we're running kind of short on time, but this is something that I think we've this idea of how do we make community engagement as practical as possible is something, again, that we've been really working on as AVAC and in our role in implementing GPP and kind of supporting the implementation of GPP. And it's a really important question because I think oftentimes, again, one of the many challenges of community engagement is that it can be hard to define what you're trying to achieve with community engagement. I think oftentimes, as Mitchell spoke to quite a bit, community engagement is seen as sort of the icing on the cake or kind of the nice to have. If we've got the money to do it, then we can do it. If we feel like we can do it, but it's often seen as not sort of core to a clinical trial or to a research program. And I think that's because oftentimes the objectives or the outcomes you're looking for from a community engagement program just remain undefined, or go along with the objectives of the clinical research itself, like recruitment and retention. And community engagement is much more broad than that. And so I think some of the kind of examples that we've seen in our recent history, and again, Mitchell put up a brief slide on some of the recent successes, actually come from two of the most recent efficacy programs that have been conducted in HIV prevention. And I will just touch on them relatively quickly because there's a lot of detail, and happy to kind of go into more detail if there's interest and questions. But the first one that I'll mention is around the development of lenacapavir, this new long-acting injectable form of PrEP that I think everyone is aware of, actually developed by Gilead. And when they initiated their efficacy program, 2 large-scale global efficacy trials, they actually expressed a strong commitment to GPP and to engaging community in that program. And I think one of the most practical examples came from the Purpose 1 trial, which was the trial conducted in cisgender women in sub-Saharan Africa. And Gilead was actually very interested in both including, making sure that they included pregnant and lactating women in the trial, as well as adolescent girls, girls younger than 18. And there was really no precedent for this, in terms of kind of ethics and regulatory approval. And so they actually saw kind of the global community as core in helping determine whether they should involve those populations, and both how. And as well as how they should involve those populations, and kind of the best way to make sure that was done in a way that kind of protected those participants. And so they engaged in a number of consultations with global advocates for HIV and sexual and reproductive health, mostly from sub-Saharan Africa, because that's where the trial was going to be conducted. And actually, the advocates help them decide, yes, we should do this. We should involve these populations that traditionally have never been involved from the get-go in an efficacy program. And so what we see there is that the community really helped both shape the research, but also make the research better, because we got a better outcome in terms of having the data from the get-go that we needed to approve lenacapavir, both for pregnant women and for adolescent girls. So that's one example. The second example that I'll talk about is again with sort of the latest and greatest efficacy program in the HIV prevention field, being conducted by another drug company, Merck, testing a monthly pill for PrEP. And this efficacy program has actually just been launched. And as people can imagine, I think designing an efficacy trial in the current context of the evolving HIV prevention landscape is really difficult. It's challenging, and there's not a clear sort of formula for how to design an efficacy trial. So Merck said, before we talk to anybody about how to design, the proper way to conduct this trial. What do we compare this monthly pill to when we enroll participants in our trial? They said the first stakeholders that we're going to bring in are the community, and before they talk to any scientific advisors, regulatory advisors, ethicists, they talk to the community, and we pulled together a consultation and really sort of hashed through all of the factors in that. And the community helped them decide what the sort of comparator should be, and I think was really formative in shaping that program. So those are two, and I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to ask again to keep the answers in 1 or 2 minutes to cover the remaining part of the webinar. So the second topic is digital tools for empowerment. So this question is tailored to Michelle Silva. How are new digital platforms reducing barriers for patients to access and participate in trials?
Thank you, Carl, and also to the previous speakers. And I think that both Blessy, Anna, Stacy, Mitchell, also Anna actually have mentioned a lot of touch points of digital, because at the end, I think we have to understand that digital is an enabler at the end. So I think when you look to the barriers, and also Anna mentioned it previously as well, how do you identify an unmet need? Where do you still see, based on the current treatment options that are available, that there's actually something out there where you can improve outcomes, where there are still things to improve? Then I think using digital tools to actually try to assess, for example, via silent listening, via scanning also public conversations, or even reach out proactively with consent to really on large scale at a short notice capture all these insights, can really help to steer certain directions of the conversations. So I think that's one aspect. The other one is also awareness, and we mentioned this before as well. Awareness about trials, and then also what Blessy mentioned, the understanding all of this information. It sounds sometimes obvious for researchers what informed consent is, what is all in there, what the steps are, but there's research out there that says only about 10% of the people actually understand what is in informed consent. So it's really low. But you have to be, of course, in order with regulations and everything. So here, digital has potential as well. I think about lay summaries. AI has a role. Think about also bringing in the cultural dimension, because it's indeed true that you cannot have always a one-size-fits-all, but now this is a standard, the one-size-fits-all. And I think now more and more we are going into phenotypes, we are understanding patient profiles much better, and the more we can map this, the more we can understand this, the more we can also have personalized guidance of helping patients to actually have a informed decision, and not only a decision. The informed, I think, is really critical, because at the end, this will enhance the quality of the data that the patients will provide. That will enhance the recruitment, the adherence as well. So these are some examples. And I also think we should touch again upon this inclusivity, which was mentioned here. Again, I think digital has a role to play, and especially how do you reach the population. So we're currently in kind of an interesting project with the European Commission ITI project, 70 partners. And one of the big questions is, how can you use technology to reach this underserved population? And this is a beautiful consortium with different types of stakeholders. And again, the patient voice, the sponsors, the researchers, bring them on the table very early on to discuss what are potential barriers for certain populations, because by only naming them, you will be able to find solutions. And I think this is where the notion of co-creation within the digital space as well, but in clinical trial space in general, is essential. And I think the previous speaker really named it as well. The co-creation, it's not trials only for patients, but it trials together with patients, starting from the development of the trials.
Thank you, Michelle. So back to Anna. Digital health raises concerns about privacy and data governance. what safeguards are essential to ensure patients feel safe sharing sensitive health information?
Thank you. Safeguarding participant trust, I think, in digital health and data governance requires definitely more than just technical solutions, and I think should be rested on the kind of different layers of protection. I think an interesting example of just importance of trust and how developing long-standing links with a community of research kind of example that I'm closely familiar with are biobanks, and particularly the good practice that came from a Bristol biobank, where there were some challenges in terms of long-term data governance, data sharing, reconsenting or not participants. And the view was to create a research community of which participants are the part, with long-standing links, and patients being able to also express their preferences about the amount of information and contact and feedback on those practices as well. So I think there's those different levels. So perhaps the one of the levels is the technical level, so things like encryption, secure servers, anonymization and pseudo-anonymization, and issues around that. But research have shown previously, we had examples of those measures alone, of course, being insufficient. So, for example, during HIV studies, participants expressed concern that digital trial platforms could inadvertently disclose their disease status, and here perhaps minimizing data collection and applying differential privacy methods, so methods of introducing some noise into the data set, so the technical solution could actually help with preventing de-anonymization of data. So there are some technical level solutions that can be potentially useful, and there's then a governance layer which is very important. And so, for example, the good participatory practice guidelines presented by AVEC and emphasize transparent data governance committees and independent oversight to prevent issues such as, for example, the function creep, where data is repurposed without consent or with protections that are not strong enough to satisfy what participants would prefer. And Ebola vaccine studies, for instance, faced rumors about hidden data use. And so this aspect of real-time and ability for real-time community engagement and making documents such as publicly available governance charters played a role in facilitating this conversation and help to counter misinformation and reassure perhaps some anxieties. Another layer is transparency and the importance of consent, and maybe seeing consent as an opportunity to address some of the concerns that participants have. And so patients must be able to understand through plain language and appropriate communication who will access their data, under what circumstances, for what purpose, and with what limits, and be also aware of these. So for example, in tuberculosis digital adherence technology studies in India and Africa found that the participation improved only when participants had a very clear communication about opt-out options and also appropriately communicated culturally sensitive explanations of issues related to disclosures and data, how data is being managed. And finally, I think there is also a layer of the kind of feedback, accountability, and thinking about equity. So it is important that patients have avenues to voice concerns through representative or other means, and to challenge misuse, to have some remedies if there is some loss of trust or concern. and that data is not going to be used in the ways that can increase stigma, which may be particularly important in the context of some diseases such as HIV, TB, and so on. And I think that community advisory boards or ethics panels, but also focusing particularly on data governance, and so the digital aspects can be helpful here. And so the safeguard, I think, are technical protections, the input of strong governance and oversight, transparency and appropriate consent processes, accountability in those structures, being designed in those structures. And I think what is very, very important is actually being community and patients focused, and to understand the challenges and concerns and address those and prioritize to be addressing those. So just going back to the consent processes, and some research has shown that if you look at the differences in understanding of different aspects of trials between higher income countries and lower middle income countries, particularly, there seems to be not a big difference in understanding in understanding of the kind of general purpose of research and background, but some differences in understanding the particularities of trial design, placebo controls, randomization, and particularly also the fact that participants have the ability to withdraw. And so I think being mindful simply of the concerns and challenges that participants in a particular locality and context may have, and feeding that into those protections is really important.
Thank you, Anna. Because some colleagues from AVAC can't stay in the call, maybe I skip some questions. So this is the question for you, Michelle Warren. Could you please share an example where patient input directly influenced trial design or outcomes?
So, Carl, I think that Mitchell may have already had to jump off the line.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I'm happy to speak to this briefly, but if you want, I think you can just continue to move on.
Yeah. So this question also, it's for you, Stacy, but I will back to previous questions. What practical steps can we, as a community, take to defend and expand civic space in research, especially in low and middle income countries?
Sure, happy to speak to this super briefly, and I'm so sorry that my dog has just decided to start barking right at this moment. I think actually this relates to what I kind of said at the start of my remarks. I think one of the most practical things that we can do as a community is continue conversations like this. You know, I think, again, as has been said by a number of people on this call, the really one of the great one of the really sort of beautiful things about community engagement, but I think one of the challenging things is that it looks different in literally every context that it's being implemented, and so therefore it's really hard to standardize. It's really hard to measure. It's really hard to understand what the kind of return on investment is of community engagement, and it's also hard to require it. And so, you know, and this is one of the things, again, you know, Mitchell spoke to. AVAC has been working for kind of in the most recent years to sort of build up this body of evidence, right? That, you know, we're not going to have sort of a standardized, you know, outline for exactly how community engagement should be conducted, you know, in every context. It's never going to happen. But what we can do, I think, is sort of build a body of how best to implement community engagement or good participatory practice or patient engagement, whatever, you know, however you would like to kind of term it, so that as a collective, we continue to sort of increase our understanding of exactly, you know, how it's done, but also really why it's done and how it can kind of, I think, not only benefit research, but I think benefit the community, right? Because again, I think part of sort of building this body of evidence is helping everybody understand that community engagement is not just about getting a clinical trial done. It's not about getting data. That's the job of the clinical researchers. It's about making sure that there's sort of a symbiotic relationship between the researchers and community. So community are brought in as partners, but they also retain their role as autonomous kind of watchdogs in making sure that this research is conducted in a way that is truly community centric and is going to lead to the best results possible. So again, more conversations like this. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Stacy, for joining our today's webinar.
Thanks so much. And I will say I do need to jump off now, but this has been great, and really appreciate you all putting it together.
Yeah, thank you so much, and looking forward to our further collaboration beyond this webinar.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah. So, back to you. What makes a partnership with patients truly collaborative rather than tokenistic?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I think the most important thought is really putting the participants and communities at the center of research, right? And Blessy Kumar has mentioned, I think, some really good examples of how thinking from this human perspective is a really important part of it. But I think there is also leaving space for participants and communities to contribute to different stages of the research process and finding appropriate and responsive mechanisms to be able to do that. So that would include creation and co-creation of agenda, and also the design and protocol development stage, thinking about ethical issues and consent and payment and logistics consultations, and then thinking about the recruitment and setup as the trial is running. And then also thinking about sharing results and dissemination and involving appropriately communities with appropriate credit in dissemination publication processes. And so I think what makes a big difference can be also to facilitate individual agents' involvement. Sorry, we sometimes as philosophers talk about moral agents and just importance of individuals as well as structures. And so I think what can help with that is just the understanding that research and research practices can really have a positive and negative social implications for the community, but also for individual participants, and that sometimes they can be long-lasting. And so keeping in mind that kind of ethical motivation through understanding of the potential impact, because obviously there will be benefits that come from the scientific research themselves and the findings, but also good research practices can facilitate benefits for patients, groups, and individuals, and positive experiences can promote this kind of long-lasting trust with science as enterprise, as Warren said. And so we have seen some, and probably are aware, some long-lasting negative implications, for example, in research with Aboriginal communities, which have had very long-lasting historical consequences. And so I think it is important to understand the potential impact on individuals, but also on maybe social equity and contact with science, generally speaking. So there may be implications in terms of very particular harm, the feeling of disempowerment, impact positive or negative on the willingness to participate in further research, which can then influence the access to research and a representation of communities and individuals in research. On the other hand, the positive kind of on the human level even experiences with participation it can include, well, practical access to the benefits of research and kind of psychological well, I think from kind of human perspective, that participants are treated as a valuable part of the whole process, and that this contact is a positive experience, generally speaking. I think can also be important, and somehow I think is slightly underappreciated. And so, just to illustrate that, I just wanted to give very briefly a very brief anecdote. So when I was a student, I participated in research. It was research in relation to scanning different brain regions activity when performing certain tasks. And I was interested because I was interested in the science then as a student. And all the research and consent processes were appropriately conducted. There was no problem. However, I really requested that I am actually told what is the outcome of the research. And after attending, I have never heard from the researchers again. And this was a long time ago when I was still a student, but it did not feel good. And I did remember then, even though I was so enthusiastic, having that little emotional response of saying, not sure I would participate again. And so I think this kind of emotional human level of interactions and respect and concern is also an important part. And I think there is also a role of individuals in organizations, in companies, in associations, and also, just organizations conducting the clinical trials, to be facilitated as individuals that perhaps want to do something good, because we do have individual and professional moral motivations, and perhaps having protections and maybe some space for those individuals who are particularly interested in enhancing practices, developing community organizations, that they are being appreciated and championed, and that certain space is made for them to be able to do a little bit extra, not only to assure research integrity and good research practices, but also to be able to explore a little bit and try to improve those practices institutionally. And I think sometimes that means giving institutional permission for those individuals to be active as advocates and be particularly interested.
Thank you. Anna, regarding the protecting civil society and patient voices amid shrinking funding, maybe, Palestina, we can ask you the question that our participant asked in the chat. So Ariadne Campbell asked, in the context of budget reduction and redistribution of priorities for governments and other major stakeholders, how NGO-based research is viewed for the future? How do we foresee the connection between the bedside, caretakers and patients, and the NGOs?
Okay, thank you. I'll try and answer it because I'm also affected very badly by this funding cuts as GCTA. So it's something that I think all of us are going. But one of the things that the earlier speaker talked about from AVAC, I think one of the things is to, the situation is what it is, right? And we need to move beyond that. So which means that we need to secure the space and keep the conversation going. So to come to, actionable recommendation, I would say that this is a great start of bringing different people working in different areas. And some of us who've had quite an impact at the global level through our advocacy in policy change, so to come and have that conversation, but to keep the people affected definitely at the center, and to value the input that comes. See, the mechanisms can be different, but I think if we all agree on the core, that this is something that is non-negotiable, then everything else around it needs to be worked out. But having said that, I know that funding is extremely important, and that is something that we also need to recognize, because I've seen that the minute there is some shortage of funds, not just today, but for 20 years, I've seen that the first thing that is not knocked off, is knocked off, is community or any work with communities, because that's really seen as not being valuable. So, how do we bring the value back to engaging with the communities? And, what doesn't get talked about falls off the radar, and what gets talked about but is not funded will also get, thrown off the table. So I think to keep the conversations, strategic conversations ongoing, and also to see how the space can be secured, not just the space, but also the funding can be secured. And like I say, when you plan for a trial, you won't plan it without funds, right? And when there are funds, a part of that, whatever amount, needs to be set aside right from the start for community engagement. Otherwise, there's no point, thinking about it. So you need to put your where your words are, you need to put action. And I think it's a great start, but we need to keep these conversations going. Think of mechanisms that we can put into place to secure the space and the funding for it. How can we better collaborate? And how can we really be impactful with the little that is available, but with the greater good that we are envisaging? I think would be something for us to really mull over as we move forward. And I think holding leaders and policymakers, donors accountable is extremely important. All the UN high-level meetings have been talking about R&D, research and development, as being very important. But what is the point of recognizing the importance if there is no funding being allotted for that? So I think globally there will be mechanisms that perhaps could come up with the funding that's needed. But I think this group, and more, I don't know what the plan is, but to keep this very important conversations we've started today going um, on ongoing on a regular basis would be very important. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we close the discussion, I'd like to invite each of our present speakers to share one short closing reflection, no more than 1 minute each. And these two last questions you will see on your screen, and also the question that Tori Taylor asked in the chat, that how much do you think that effort to localize R&D through local capacity strengthening, etc., have supported GPP, to borrow a USA term? So maybe we can start with you, Valesina.
I thought I already answered this because it was on the screen. I took the time because I need to leave now. And so I've already answered this question about keeping the conversation going, holding leaders accountable. It's a responsibility. The UN high-level meetings on everything, whether it is AMR, whether it is infectious whether it is TB, whether it's HIV, have all talked about it. So let's keep this going. And I just want to say a big thank you, but I do need to step off right now. And all the best, and I'll be available for any further conversations needed. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much for
Thank you,
having
Justina.
me here. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
And the closing reflection from you, Anna.
Thank you. I think there were two concepts that Mitchell Warren and Blissy Kumar mentioned, and one is the orientation on doing research with people, not on people, and the second, thinking about engagement of communities with science as an enterprise, as the opposed to single instances. And I think seeing it through that lens, as well as being aware of the impact on individuals that research may have, I think can motivate us to improve practices. And that may mean engaging participants and stakeholders, but also thinking about facilitating of lower and middle income countries, partners and actors localized there in the publication process, for example, and dissemination process. So seeing it really, really widely. And I think the very important aspect of this really is to pay attention to the development of long-standing research collaborations and relations before the trial commences. And that may include a long-standing relationship with the community, which is independent of trials. So for example, in some cases, researchers would be providing benefits such as support to local schools in addition to doing research. It may mean creating a long-standing advisory board that is co-created with local stakeholders, or perhaps conducting a stakeholder engagement research prior to starting the research and other engagement activities. And I think those activities can be written into the planned financing and funding, either in the public sector as part of grants on embedded into the financial planning in the private sector collaborations. And in terms of looking ahead in the next 5 years, I think the one change, if I had to choose, would be to create new and utilize existing networks and resources to truly incorporate the feedback from trial participants and communities in the design of the collaboration activities themselves. So things like this worked really well. Having a peer who I could ask questions was really valuable. And I think that can help to prioritize resources as well. And potentially that means designing systems that would feed those results after the trial finishes into what is done next time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your insightful contribution to this webinar, Anna.
Thank you very much for the invitation as well. Much appreciated. Really interesting discussion.
So, Michelle Silva, if you have any closing reflections, we would like to hear from you.
So thank you, Carl, and also Anna. So I just would like to thank everyone. So I think this was a really great discussion. I think what is important is that we keep on working together. It's really the co-creation, which is really key. So research-led innovation, making sure you contact sponsors on time, you build this relationship, because if you're developing drugs, you want to be on the table. So I really encourage to keep this community going, and also set up your network of patient experts, patient research experts, and make sure that you also become, for example, member of patient-focused medicine development. These kind of initiatives really make the bridge between the patient needs, the research needs, and at the end also the commercial options that are there. So I would like to thank everyone who participated in this webinar. And if there are any questions or suggestions in the future where together with the Infectious Disease Alliance, we can use digital tools to enhance this patient's experience, to capture patient data and get insights out of this to inspire new research, we're happy to hear about this. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Michelle, for your support for co-organizing this webinar. And thank you to all our speakers and participants for such a rich and timely discussions. We try to cover the questions raised by our participants. As I shared in the chat the link to the call to actions that you can review and sign it. The message today is clear. Patient-driven innovation is not optional. It is essential for building fair, effective, and inclusive clinical trials. We must safeguard patient voices, restore funding for civil society, strengthen low and middle income countries' engagement, and leverage digital tools responsibly. This is why the Infectious Disease Alliance is urging everyone here to endorse and amplify this call to actions. Together, we can ensure that infectious disease research moves from bench to bedside with patients at the very center. So the key takeaways from our today's discussion is we understood how patient partnership shape stronger, more inclusive clinical trials. And we learned from real-world infectious disease case examples across low and middle-income countries' contexts. And we explored ethical, digital, and advocacy strategies to build a trust in clinical research. And we provided you access to tools and networks that support co-design trial participation. And we will share the webinar report with our all participants and with the call to action and the recordings of the event. And we organize different periodic events and advocacy campaigns. So I encourage you to keep looking at the website and subscribe to our newsletter. And on behalf of IDEA, thank you once again for joining us today. Let us continue this movement. Let us continue this conversation. And most importantly, let us take action. This concludes today's webinar. Stay safe, stay engaged, and let's keep moving forward together. Goodbye, everyone.